So what I'm trying to do is say agencies need to put out a checklist of this is what we require when you're applying for a permit. And if you give them those things, they've got 30 days to review it. And if they don't see anything that violates the rules, they issue the permit.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the 435 podcast. I'm your host, Robert McFarland, and we got a unique one for you today. This is a two-parter that we put into one. We have back from the dead, Celeste Maloy, after a contentious race in the primary elections. She just eked out a victory over, 147 votes or something like that she won the congressional seat, the District 2 in Utah. And she's here to talk about what she's working on the Hill. She really wants Southern Utah and her constituents to understand what she's working on, what she's about. We talked about FISA. She responds to that. She talks about Trump and all the different bills that she's on. We hope you enjoy this episode, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe, share it with friends. We're continuing to try and grow. And one last housekeeping item, too, I want you guys to know about. The Housing Action Coalition is a coalition of businesses, leaders, and members of our community that are working on housing affordability in Southern Utah. On October 30th at 8:30 at Black Desert Resort, the link will be in the description below. We're going to have a forum. It's our annual forum. I'm going to be hosting a panel interviewing two of our mayors and two developers on this exact problem. And it should be a full morning of breakout sessions and panels talking about the idea. So if you have an opinion on it, or if you want to learn more about what Southern Utah is doing to solve and to push the rock forward in affordable housing for us, make sure you show up there October 30th. It's in the morning, 8:30 to about 1. The links will be below. Enjoy this episode, guys. We'll see you out there.
How's it going?
So well.
Yeah?
It's an exciting life that I lead.
That is indeed true.
Yeah. Also, I have not had a chance to rest or have a nap or anything since they called my race. So This is like the version of me that's been running for office for 15 months nonstop.
Yeah. No, I get it. It wears you out.
It does wear a person out. But there are good things. I mean, there are exciting things that kind of give you energy and keep you going.
Yeah.
And then there's also the fact that you just go constantly and never have a chance to rest.
What were your main thoughts before they called the race? Were you nervous? Were you just like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, I mean, election day was June 25th. It's been almost 2 months.
That's crazy.
And so there isn't much I can do.
Right.
Once everybody's voted, you just wait. Can't convince anyone.
What was going through your mind?
Sit around and wait.
You had too much stuff going on.
I'm already in office, so I just kept doing the job, and then keeping an eye on it. Yeah. And I thought I was handling it really well, but when they finally called the race, I felt like I lost a lot of weight. Was I nervous? Yeah, there's something wrong with you if you're not nervous when you're running for the United States Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. But I didn't have a whole lot of time to worry about it or think about it because I had to keep doing the job.
Yeah, the cost is so much more than I think most people can even imagine.
Yeah, but the rewards are really rewarding as well. I mean, it's sort of everything about Congress is a lot.
I'm calling BS.
No,
the rewards are rewarding.
Yeah, okay, so let me reword that.
I've been waiting to have just a real conversation with you. Up till now, I'm like, I don't want her to be mad at me.
Well, I'm furious. No, but I've spent a lot of my life doing policy work.
Right.
And when you do policy work, you just have to develop a tolerance for things taking a long time. And there are some things you just can't change.
You got to get used to the boring.
Yeah. Well, and just the long game. You're always playing the long game. There's really not that much of a short game in policy. Mm-hmm. But now I can introduce a bill instead of going and talking to people and trying to convince them something's a problem. If I know it's a problem, I can write a bill. And that's what I mean by the rewards are rewarding. The ability to actually make changes and be part of that process is what keeps me going. Yeah. When I've been on the road for 2 weeks and I haven't gotten more than 10 hours of sleep total in a week. And
I'd be dead.
People I barely know are calling me and busting my chops about something that I have very little control over. I mean, there's always a lot coming at you, but the good things that come at you are just way better than I know how to describe right now in my exhausted state. So I say things like the rewards are rewarding, which doesn't mean anything.
That's good. That's good. But I think I'm glad I just dove a little bit deeper into that, because I think that makes much more sense to me, right?
Yeah.
There was a couple things I wanted to segue into, but you commented on something, and it was kind of the text message I sent you as far as like what I wanted to talk about. I want to know what
I don't even remember what you said.
What
you
is
wanted
your
to talk about.
what? I know I sent it to Bella earlier, and then I knew you hadn't gotten it yet, but I wanted
just
to know what.
Walk in blind. Whatever you want to talk
That's
about.
my favorite
Soup
thing.
to nuts. Let's do this.
That's my favorite thing about you is I've never had to really prepare. I could prepare, but I've gotten some feedback that I should be a little bit more targeted rather than float around and talk about a bunch of different things. So
ignore those people. They're wrong.
Yeah, that's not fun.
But it's no fun.
Now he's ignoring us.
I think it is fun. I think it's fun.
Okay.
If I really, I'm thoughtful with what I want to talk to you about. So I was thoughtful.
Sure. Okay.
You've slept, it was hyperbolic, 10 hours in the last week.
No, this week hasn't been too bad.
Okay.
I've had some late nights and early mornings, but it hasn't been too bad.
Okay, walk me through what does a typical day look like for a congressperson? Like, I think most people have no effing idea.
No, I do think you're right about that. And one of my goals as a member of Congress is to pull that curtain back and help people have an idea. I think that some of the anger in politics comes from people feeling like they're locked out and they can't see the man behind the curtain.
I hear transparent, be transparent.
Yeah.
Right. I hear that all the time. It's like, okay, well, what does that mean?
Yeah. But then also, if you want to get all of your news from TikTok, it's pretty hard for people to be transparent because you can't learn everything in 15 seconds. But I probably have two different types of typical days. There's a typical in session day and a typical out of session day.
Okay.
So in session means Congress is voting. We're in Washington, D.C. And a typical day there starts at like 8 a.m, which doesn't sound super early, but that is 6 Utah time. And I go back and forth every week. So it's kind of nice that I don't usually have super early mornings when I'm in DC. And I usually have some sort of unofficial event before I get to the office, a fundraiser, meeting with somebody, something like that. Get to the office around 9. On, the day after we fly in, we always have a conference at 9 a.m. So all of the Republicans meet together, or there is a meeting for all of the Republicans. Not everybody comes. And we meet with leadership. We talk about what's coming up, what we're doing that week, what our messaging is for the week, that kind of thing. So we kind of, have our staff meeting, so to speak, as a party. And
that's led by
the speaker and his team.
Okay.
And because Blake Moore is the vice chair, he actually gets to help lead that meeting. So it's kind of cool that we only have 4 members of Congress from Utah, but one of them gets to be part of that.
That's cool.
And then after that, it's committee hearings, committee meetings, meetings with constituents.
So what committees are you on right now?
I'm on the Small Business Committee and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
Okay.
Sweet.
Yeah. And it's really easy to relate those to things that Utahns care about because, transportation and infrastructure has jurisdiction over roads and railways and water and airlines, all things that we are concerned about. And small business is, I think, 98% of the businesses in Utah are small businesses, which is saying something if you look at like Silicon Slopes and some of the really big businesses. That
what was the classification for a small business again?
It actually depends on which
employees?
kind of business. There's several different ways of classifying.
Like
sometimes it's based on revenue. Sometimes it's based on number of employees.
So it seems weird that you would have a committee over a vague group of...
Well, it's defined. It is defined, but it's defined differently in different categories.
Right. Okay. So there's somewhere between corporate and big business and small business.
Yeah.
And you're falling within that category, but it's kind of hard to identify where that line is. So,
it's easy to identify. You just have to know which context you're talking about. But generally, it's like less than 500 employees, which is fairly large. So a lot of businesses fall into the small business category. And our job is to make sure that the government is not enacting policies that harm small businesses and is enacting policies that create the kind of environment where small businesses can thrive. And so those hearings are really rewarding. It's also one of the committees where we're bipartisan a lot. And that surprised me. Most of the hearings I've attended in the
lobbyist groups
8
for
months,
small business isn't all that powerful. So it's easy to have everybody just have their own opinion. And surprise, surprise,
except
it's not all that different.
the whole state, the whole country is a lobby group for small business, right? Because there's a Main Street everywhere.
True.
There's a,
True.
mom and pop shops and local businesses and small startups in every district in the country.
True.
So it's not a regional issue at all in any way.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I thought was really cool. The Democrats on the committee fight as hard for small businesses as the Republicans do usually. And I mean, that doesn't sound very profound, but most of the hearings we've had so far have been on things like EPA regulations. And so we'll have Republicans saying, we're over-regulating these small businesses and putting them out of business. And then the Democrats come in and say, yeah, we're over-regulating and putting these businesses out. And you just don't see that on some of the more high-profile committees that get a lot of the airtime.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a good sign that we're still bipartisan about wanting to have healthy main streets in our towns all across the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This actually goes back to what I was going to say. I was listening to Dave Smith. Do you know Dave Smith?
I don't think so.
He's a libertarian.
Okay.
He's also a comedian. He has a very inappropriate but very smart podcast.
Just sounds like all the things I like. Libertarian policies.
I know.
Funny.
So Dave Smith,
Comedy.
if you don't know Dave Smith, he was the front runner to run for president in the Libertarian Party, but he didn't want to do it because he chose his family. He wanted to be close to his family and all that stuff. So anyway, he said
Very smart.
He said this the other day. He said, outrage is a finite resource.
Oh, it doesn't seem like it lately, though.
I know. But that's the thing is that we are wasting all of our outrage on stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it's because we allow the media industry, right? The mainstream media, I guess that's the title it's been dubbed with.
Yeah.
The mainstream media gets to talk about this is what we're outraged about right now. And then they dictate that to everybody.
Yeah.
And so we have to take back the thought processes of the media is not giving us what we should be upset about. It's what they want us to be upset about. And we need to actually talk about what are the real serious issues. And we're never going to be able to do that if we don't have this kind of a conversation, right? Mm-hmm.
It's also the easiest way to bond with people you don't know very well yet. I mean, anyone who's been new at a job or, started a new school, like the quickest thing you do to get to know people, it's like, cafeteria food sucks, right?
That's funny.
Somebody agrees. But if you're, everyone can hate the Denver Broncos, right? It's something that we can bond over.
Yeah.
And we do it in politics, but it builds a lot more in politics.
Yeah.
I mean, you can only generate so much outrage about the football team you don't like, but the political party you don't like, or the politician you don't like,
or the one singular thing that they said this one time in this one weird context, and then it's taken out of context, and then we run with it for
I don't know what
a
you're
week
talking
and a half.
about. I've never experienced
that.
that's
never happened, right? It's just so ridiculous. I can't believe we got to this point. But so talking about issues that matter. So small business. So I would say you're having the most impact on the Hill right now for Southern Utah on the small business side and the transportation and infrastructure stuff that we have going on, right? That's where you're going to be the most effective?
Because those are the committees.
Yeah, those are
your
the committees
right?
I'm on. They also just treat me like I'm on the Natural Resources Committee because of my background.
We talked about that before too, yeah.
So if you go to congress.gov, you can see every bill I've introduced and every bill I've co-sponsored. And I would say, between those three areas, my committee work and then the natural resources stuff, that's where I'm having the biggest impact. It's where I'm spending the most time.
Mm-hmm. So we got a big grant for the reuse water. Mm-hmm. That was back in May, I think.
Sometime in the spring. Yeah.
Sometime in the spring.
$20 million.
29.
Bureau of Rec. Yeah.
Yeah. So for $1 billion project allotted, right? We were able to get that, a grant passed to get that done. What else are you specifically working on? No, I want to get back to your day too, but I just while we're here.
Yeah. No, this is how my
we got
days
to
go.
9
I start
a.m.
on something and then I do a bunch of other stuff and then I never get back to what I started on.
Yes, we're at 9 a.m.
Oh,
we have to do the rest of the day.
Just put a pin in 9 a.m. And from there on out, I'm late. There you go. That's the rest of my day. The most sweeping bill I've introduced so far that when it passes, it's going to make the biggest impact on people's day-to-day lives.
When it passes.
When it passes.
Yeah. No, we're
She
gonna
already
do it.
knows.
Yeah.
She already knows.
It's
Did
called the
math.
FREE Act. And what it
Brilliant name.
does, I
Brilliant.
know. Thank you. There, we also
I'm
have to
making
do
fun
marketing.
of it. I'm making fun of it. Just the cheeky way. I'm sorry. I sometimes like the Patriot Act and like all these things.
Yeah.
The names of them drive
Yeah.
me nuts. Can we just say what it is?
No.
Do we have to have a one-liner? It
No.
doesn't have to be a one. It doesn't have
It's
to be
the
a marketing
number one
technique.
rule of politics. You've got to give it a catchy name because
See,
otherwise,
that's what people hate, though.
I know. Even I hate it. But here's what happens. I did a town hall last
You
night.
can't
in St.
hate it and
George.
also do it, though.
Yeah, you can.
I guess
I
that's
hate
true.
going to the gym.
I immediately disagree with what I just said. Keep going. I'm sorry.
Well, now you've got me on a tangent. I did a town hall last night in St. George, and somebody asked me about like, well, how do you feel about HB 3218? It's like, well, the number, that means that is sequentially when that bill got introduced in this Congress. So that's the 3,218th bill. I don't know it by the number.
Like, I have no idea.
But if somebody comes up to me and says, how do you feel about the FREE Act? I know what that means. And it usually takes more than one
You're
Congress
taking
to
the two
pass
extremes,
something.
though. You went from the most ridiculous to the other side of most ridiculous.
I do politics for a living.
I know.
That's what we do.
I got it.
So what's the middle ground then?
Yeah.
I don't know what the bill is because the free bill
Well,
doesn't
I
tell
was
me
about to
anything.
tell you.
So okay, let's
Okay.
keep going.
So
I'll
what
give it a
does-
new name.
What it does is require agencies to go look at all the permits they issue and say which ones could be a permit by rule. And without overcomplicating this, it's something that people can understand really easy. This is how most local permits work. Like if you want a building permit, they have a checklist of things you have to provide. When you provide those things, you get a permit. Federally, what usually happens is you write up some sort of, proposal and give it to a bureaucrat somewhere. And they have however long they want to look at it and make a decision. Then it goes to somebody above them at the regional level and they have to
So
review it.
give me walk me through one of a permit.
Okay.
Well, like when Leslie Knope submitted her bill to the thing, she
Yeah.
goes to it and
Yeah.
she figures out who to talk to.
Everything in
That's
life
the process.
can be explained
I
by
can't
Parks
use
and
Park
Rec.
and Rec.
And
can't use
that was
Parks
even
Rec.
local
Parks and Rec.
government. It's worse when you're at the federal level.
So the permit. It's
you
permit at the
wanna-
federal level. Like
you want to
what?
build a road. Say there was
Okay.
a corridor in
This-
Washington County
you,
in a northerly direction.
UDOT wants to build a road.
Yes.
Okay.
And if it happens to be in Washington County, they're probably going to be going across public land. So they're going to have to work with an agency that way. It's probably going to impact an endangered species. So you're going to have to work with an agency that way. And then there's probably federal funding. So then you've got to work with whatever agency that comes through. And so you have layer upon layer of permitting processes. And there's not time limits on most of them. And a lot of them don't even have a process, really. Like the agency has a ton of discretion in how they do these permits. So you might have to do an environmental impact study. You might only need to do an environmental assessment, which isn't that much easier. And then you've got these different agency requirements, but they have a lot of discretion about what those requirements are. And so I've spent a lot of my time talking to people who are like, I needed a permit. I submitted it to the local people. They were great. They were really helpful. And then I didn't hear anything back and I didn't hear anything back. And I checked with them and they said it was at the region and they hadn't heard anything. And then, Congress made a phone call and then it ended up on somebody's desk in DC and we don't know when we're going to hear back. And in the meantime, what happens to an infrastructure project when it takes a long time to build? It gets more expensive. So time is money and inflation. And then also the taxpayers are paying for the bureaucrats who aren't getting back to you. They're paying for the local government who's applying for it. And if they get sued, they're usually paying for both sides of the lawsuit. And so the example I always use is like if you had a bridge that you knew you needed, you could go out and get a design and build the bridge for, say, $40 million. But if you have to take 15 years of environmental studies and permitting and getting sued and re-permitting.
The Lake Powell pipeline is a prime example of this exact thing.
That I may have worked on the permitting for.
Right.
But if at the end of 15 years, if you ever get the permit to build that bridge, it now probably costs the taxpayers $160 million instead of $40 million.
And then you
you
do it
could have
again.
built 4 bridges for that. And it's the exact same bridge. You didn't get a better bridge from this whole process and all this time and all the taxpayers, money wasted. You just greased the wheels of government bureaucracy. So what I'm trying to do is say agencies need to put out a checklist of this is what we require when you're applying for a permit. And if you give them those things, they've got 30 days to review it. And if they don't see anything that violates the rules, they issue the permit. as a matter of course. And right now it works the other way around. There's sort of a presumption you don't get a permit until they're like, okay, we're totally satisfied. This
It's
is
funny.
a permit.
I did not realize. So I just did an episode about Hidden Springs. It's an RV resort in Ivins. The first and only like RV.
spit on your table.
No, that's okay. Nobody saw it because the camera was on me, so you were safe.
I know what you're talking about.
I didn't need to confess.
She gleeked water all over everybody. Just kidding. So it's interesting to me because exactly what you're describing, what happens at the federal level, happens in Ivins, Utah. Right?
Yeah.
The same thing.
We're all used to it. We are so used to bureaucracy. We don't even really
It's like
question
an
it.
expectation.
There's a
yeah.
tiny version of it in Ivins, and then there's a massive version of it up at the federal level. Why do you think
But it's
this
the
hasn't?
same.
This seems like such a no-brainer. Why this has been proposed before and been shot down, or why have we not figured this out by now?
Because the bureaucracy sort of feeds itself. There
I
are
have a name
people
for it.
who's, what is it? If it's a dumb name, he's going to make fun of you.
It's a really good name. The bureaucracy degreasing bill.
Okay,
You're
Free Act is
degreasing
about
the
to get
wheels
a
of
new
the
name.
bureaucracy.
I need to go to ChatGPT for this one. Just give me give me the bill. I'll plug it into ChatGPT and say summarize this in one line.
You can get it on congress.gov.
I know I can. I actually could probably get it on Perplexity and then download it straight from there and just plug it into
You want me to do
ChatGPT.
it? Here,
Yeah. Okay.
let's see.
I bet
Stay
you it's not even
tuned.
there. Stay
I'll
tuned,
work-
everybody.
I'll
He's
work
gonna,
on it.
he's gonna work
New
on
name.
this because we're
In case we don't get it done by December, we'll have to reintroduce it in January.
So
So it may be reintroduced with a new name. You heard it here
in
first.
case you don't get it done in December. This sounds like a really good thing. You need to push through rapidly. I
I agree.
want to support you with this.
I
one.
do
This
want to
is good.
say this, though. Here's the big difference between having this problem in Ivins, Utah, or having this problem on the federal level. You can drive to Ivins, meet with the mayor, meet with the city council, meet with the city attorney, and talk to
exactly.
them. Good luck driving to Washington, D.C. and meeting with Joe Biden.
Or even if,
And
or
if
the
you did,
Department
still
of
good
the
luck.
Interior, or whoever, right? It is.
Right.
You're
What's the bill
trying to
number?
push this
What's
through.
the bill number?
I don't know. We just talked about this.
So should I just say
It's the
summarize?
free. It's put it.
It's
Put
the Free Act.
the Free Act,
F-R-E-E.
and then what the
all
subcommittee?
capitalized.
Put the subcommittee. Is it in the transportation?
I
in that
actually
one?
don't know which committee they referred it to because it would be so sweeping, they were going to refer it to multiple committees.
Oh, okay. The Free Act. Try Free Act and then Celeste Maloy because your
Yeah.
name's on it as
Yes.
author.
Yep.
And how many
Me and
co-sponsors?
Lori Chavez DeReamer. I think we have 15 or 16 co-sponsors. We have 2 co-leads, me and Lori Chavez DeReamer from Oregon,
Mm-hmm.
because also a Western state, and they have a lot of the same problems.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a big coalition on the west side of the country for this,
Yeah.
and probably not a lot of interest anywhere else.
Yeah, well,
because they're like, we don't ever do.
there
with
is
this.
interest everywhere else because they still have to get federal permits for things.
For a lot of
I
stuff.
mean,
That makes
when
sense.
when a barge runs into a bridge and the bridge collapses into the Chesapeake Bay,
That's never happened.
in a blue state, then suddenly they're really interested in why permitting takes so long.
I listened somewhere that they said the original cost of that bridge, and then what it would cost to rebuild today, and it was an insane
Yes.
multiple.
Yeah.
It was an insane multiple. I
Yeah.
can't remember the details, but I was like, whoa.
And
that
why
was
does it
huge.
cost so much more? I mean,
Inflation.
there's some inflation, but it costs so much more because you have to get all the permits and do all the studies. We built the Hoover Dam in the 1920s, so 100 years ago, and did in 2 years and under budget. Can you imagine what it would take to build the Hoover Dam now? I mean, it's in a
No, they wouldn't do it. There's no incentive for any
It
organization,
would kill
private or
too many
public.
fish.
Yeah.
Well, there would be no incentive to do that. And I can't help but think because of the regulations, it's just killing the thought in anybody's brain
Yes.
as to taking on a project of that
Yes.
magnitude, which is probably why we don't have nuclear power plants, which is
That
probably
is
why
exactly
we don't have
why we don't.
so
we
many
have
infrastructure
the technology.
things.
We
have the
know
technology.
how to produce nuclear power. We know how safe it is, but nobody wants to be
And
able to
if you
put their
cut-
name on a permit just in case.
If you cut out a lot of those, bureaucratic bills, I guess, but like bureaucratic expenses,
yeah,
right?
the bureaucratic process, the hang-ups, the red tape.
Potentially those things financially make sense because
Yes.
that's the way the country is being run, right?
See,
Everybody's
you've
like,
caught
follow
the spirit.
I know, I like this.
Come evangelize with me on the Hill and get my
I know, I like
my
it.
colleagues to pass the Free Act.
I like this one.
which
All right,
is
I got
about
it.
to be
I got it. Here
renamed
we go.
to.
I got a new name. This is what it says. The Free Act introduced by Representative Celeste Maloy aims to streamline federal permitting through a permit by rule system, potentially expediting project approvals while maintaining environmental protections. So call it the Permit by Rule Act.
That's what the next one's going to be. So this one just requires them to go identify what they could do permit by rule. Then we're going to require them to do it.
That's a pretty good summarization, though, right?
It is a good summarization.
AI, dude.
Yeah.
AI.
Perplexity.
Artificial
solid.
intelligence.
If you're not
is
using
actually
Perplexity,
intelligent.
I would highly recommend that your staff use it.
I'm trying to get my staff to be good about thinking and not just use computers to do everything. So if any of them listen to
gosh.
this, I will kill them.
Yeah, but
I won't kill them. That would be illegal.
But I won't kill them. That would be illegal. And this is
This
I
is
would not do that,
recorded.
everybody. This is not saying that I would kill someone.
I am not in
Please do
favor
not use
of
this.
murder. I'm in favor of being a good manager.
So but this is but see, this is the thing with politicians.
You are in favor of murder?
I think the idea being a good manager is identifying what is going to make your team more efficient and what are some tools that could help us be effective in communication and doing all these things. And Perplexity, it's multiple language models that are pulling from public data sources, scholarly journals. Like it has it has the entirety of all the law, past legal statutes and everything. It has all that access to all that database. And so you can get an analysis of that in summaries to be able to work more efficiently.
Do they sponsor this show?
They don't. They don't. I ran
I'm just
into it.
busting your chops. I
ran
listen to a
into
lot
it.
of podcasts, and there's always the point in the podcast where they're like, "Hey,
And this
let's
episode is
totally naturally-
brought to you
yeah.
by FS Coffee Company.
You look tired this morning, Robert. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because our sponsor, FS
exactly.
Coffee.
This is when you listen to baseball. If you listen to baseball on the radio,
I don't.
The radio announcers, they always just fit it into the in between strikes and balls. It's
Yeah,
so funny
yeah.
to me.
That's
I
called
love it.
professionalism.
I know. I'm not good at
And
that.
could Perplexity do that?
Yeah.
All right.
I think
All
it can.
You may have convinced me.
Just
It's
looking
a
up.
great fact check.
Perplexity was founded in 2022 by Aravind Servinas. Check me on I don't know how to pronounce that. Dennis Yaretz, Johnny Ho, and Andy Conwisky, engineers with backgrounds in back-end systems, AI, and machine learning.
Yeah, it's pretty brilliant. And so it's Google on steroids in the sense that it's
Large
checking
language model. Mhm.
instead of just giving you what the most queried results are, or whoever paid to be up in the search bar, it's saying out of the aggregate of data, I'm going to summarize and give you the information you're asking about sourced independently, just like footnotes, like so you can click on the sources, it goes straight to the source.
Okay.
So
You're
it's
speaking to my lawyer heart now.
It's fact checking. It's based the first language model that was set was the language model that's trained on like judicial documents. There's a specific AI that they
It
started.
says the pro model, formerly Copilot, I know Copilot, asks the user clarifying questions to refine queries. It enables users to upload and analyze local files, including images, alongside generating images using AI. Additionally, it provides access to an API. So it's like a free...
it's an integrator.
People can add metadata to it all at one time.
Yeah. So, and then as you ask it questions,
crazy.
it learns on your questions and then even suggests like, hey, maybe you might be interested in this or this. And so it allows for deeper understanding on a given topic.
I'm just a little skeptical about anything that's supposed to be smart when I've had the same phone
I don't
for 5
disagree.
years, and every time I type in any word that starts with T, it changes it to tiger. I don't think I've ever put the word tiger in a text, but if I try to say time together, and it's supposed to learn. It's supposed to get smarter every time I type a
but that's
text,
not
but it
true.
doesn't do it.
They didn't. That thought is that it should be getting better. That's either in the marketing they lied to you about it, or your misunderstanding of like how that works, because that is not how Apple phones, Samsung, they don't do that. They're not learning.
Well,
These language models aren't on the phone yet.
I will surrender to your superior knowledge on this one because you're clearly right. It is not getting better.
It's not getting better. It's for sure not.
But it's somewhat the way I see it is like, okay,
it still
why?
writes duck.
Yeah,
Yeah,
why?
it's never duck.
It says duck. I didn't write duck. Everybody.
I have used the word duck in a text before. I don't use the other word, but I do not use the word tiger
I don't
in
use
text.
the other word either. How dare you?
It's not shot. I'm not trying to say shot.
It's not shot. You should know by now it's not shot.
Nobody says holy shot. Why would it think that's what you're trying to say?
Oh, we're so off track.
You're
We're
a
so off
piece of
track.
shot.
I know we're going to run out of time, and we've got
I
so many
know.
important things to talk about.
I know.
I'm just going to have
wanna
to come
talk,
back.
I want to talk. I know, but then it's like 6 months from now, and then you got 30 minutes
Yeah,
again.
yeah.
That's okay. You're busy. I get it. So I'm
You
going to
should
go back
just
to
be
it.
glad that she's here, Rob.
You can, yeah, Rob, you
Rob?
should be grateful.
I'm so glad
You
you're
can edit this part out. I can come back next week. I have some time.
Boom. There we go.
Okay.
Maybe we
If
can
you
clip
want to
them
just
together.
redo it,
No, I don't want to redo it. This is good. This is a great
add on.
We'll do a
conversation.
part 2, Celeste part 2.
Because I have lots of things I'm working on.
We're not cutting any of this out, by the way.
Okay, I'll behave.
Not even the part where you spit on the table.
No, that's authentic. You got to have that in there. That's called transparency.
Yeah,
Raw
exactly.
data.
So, okay, let's, with a little bit of time we have left, I know we're going to.
No, we're going to play Let's Make a Deal. I'll come back next week. If I can come back next week and we can go through the bills I've introduced and what they would do.
Does that sound like fun?
It sounds like more fun than kicking chickens in the ditch to me.
Okay, all right. Okay, we could do that. We could do that.
all
I
right.
want to talk about Chevron.
Which is another favorite topic of mine that's going to take a lot of time.
That's okay. Let's ChatGPT Perplexity summarize it.
Okay.
I'm on it.
It got 7 seconds of airtime in any of the media.
Yeah.
But
it's huge.
it was huge.
It's huge, and it's going to be huge for a long time.
Something messed that up. There was a big event that happened right at the same time. Was it the assassination?
Elections. Yeah.
Or
Well,
was
it was about a month later, but there was primary
Something
elections
happened
were going
right
on.
by it. But anyway,
What
yeah.
should I ask Perplexity?
No. Yeah, or you can. But
Yeah, ask Perplexity about the Chevron deference while I talk about it. So in 1984, the Supreme Court said that in the absence of clarity from Congress, they'll defer to an agency's interpretation of what a statute means, as long as the agency isn't clearly violating the law. And so basically they're saying in the space between absolute clarity and breaking the law, the agency's got some room to play. And since 84,
or how to apply the law. And maybe not even breaking the law, but how am I going to apply this law to this thing?
Yeah, but if they go so far that they're doing something that clearly violates what Congress intended, then that's where their deference ends.
Right.
But since 1984, that has just grown and grown and grown. We've gotten so used to deference that now I would argue agencies do things that clearly break the law. But the really troubling thing is even in that space, they're writing, interpreting, and enforcing their own rules. Agencies are. Executive branch agencies that are in no way accountable to the public are acting like all three branches of government. And when we talk about the federal government, like most people, especially in this part of the country, if you say the government, they're not thinking of Congress. They're not thinking of the president. They're thinking of, people in white trucks with exempt plates, with clipboards, or, the bureaucrats, the people who are actually regulating our lives every day. They're part of the executive branch, and they don't have to answer to the people for any of these rules they write or how they enforce them.
It's my understanding that the EPA is a clear violator of how they operate with statutes that they've been given.
Yeah, that's what all those hearings that I'm talking about in small business, where the Democrats were as hard on the administration as we were. They were EPA regulations that are killing small businesses. So being able to bring that to his, go ahead. Ask your question.
I was just going to say, so specifically, like bringing it to home a little bit. I know of plenty of like small diesel shops that will delete EGR coolers and EGR valves and tune trucks to make them get better fuel mileage, not roll coal, right?
Yeah.
When you floor it in a diesel and you get all the black smoke coming out, that's unburned fuel, right? So this specifically impacts stuff like that, where they can't necessarily regulate that anymore. And I know of one company in particular here locally that was fined like $500,000 because they were tuning trucks when the trucks get more power, better fuel mileage, have less weight on them. It's better for the environment.
And it's better overall for the
less emissions.
environment.
Yeah. And if I was passing a law that did that, I would come on here. You guys would tell me that's a horrible idea and it's bad for Southern Utah. And if I didn't listen to you, you'd go out and get people to vote against me. But when the EPA does it, what can you do?
Yeah, you can't.
You can write them a letter.
It's like yelling at the wind.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay the fine, you go to prison.
Yeah. So this is why overturning Chevron is so exciting. I've had people call me and they're kind of upset because they're like, you keep talking about overturning Chevron, but none of these rules have gone away. No, the rules didn't go away because they overturned it. What went away is the wall they had to hide behind in court.
Right.
So now when, say, you're friends with the diesel shop, if they sue the EPA over this, the court isn't going to say, well, we defer to agencies to make the Chevron rules. Deference. They're going to say, yeah, what they're doing here doesn't conform with what that statute said. They're wrong. They lose.
Hopefully the judge sees it that way.
Well, the Supreme Court just told them to.
Right. So I mean, but it's still up to the interpretation of the judge, but you get to have your day in court at least, which is that challenge of the balance of power. I've heard this a lot.
Yeah.
And I always want to keep bringing it back to the Constitution, is that there's mechanisms. Somebody asked me, why is Phil suing Cox Like it's such a waste of time and money and energy and all these things.
Okay, I don't want to waste the
for
time
whatever
we have
it is.
left for
For
that.
whatever
'cause
it is,
can't do
I know.
anything
But
about
what
that,
I'm saying is that the power of the judicial system to check those federal agencies, now they have the ability to check that,
and so
instead
does
of
the
pass it
legislative
off
branch.
and hold our hands up like we don't.
So I belong to the legislative branch. We're supposed to check the executive branch as well. And we've just been giving them more and more power and never taking it back. And they're not scared of us. So the branches are supposed to jealously check each other's power. We haven't been jealous enough on the legislative side. We've been willing to delegate a lot of authority to the executive branch and then blame the executive branch for the way they use it. This is going to force us to step up and use our own power more.
And write better bills.
Yeah, but it also means when we have a hearing and we bring someone in from the executive branch, they can't just ignore us, which is what they do. We say, you're doing this and that isn't what the law says. And they're like, that's not how we interpret it. Well, now it does matter what the law says, not how they interpret it.
Yeah.
And so it gives us more power to check them.
Challenge.
We will have to write better bills. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
We're going to have to go back and clarify
It's going to make
a lot of those
it's going to make
bills.
it difficult to come to consensus because you can't make really broad statements any longer because those broad statements are going to get challenged, and then now
we're going to have to be clearer about what we mean, but also we're going to have better oversight authority, and the winners are going to be people who are living and working in this country.
It's a big step towards deregulation, especially on infrastructure stuff that we need.
And accountability. Accountability is so important. If somebody's using your tax dollars to do something, they owe you an explanation of it. And when they're protected by layers of bureaucracy, they're not accountable. Nobody from the EPA comes to you and says, this is how I'm spending your tax dollars. This is why I thought it was a good use of your tax dollars to go after a diesel shop in southern Utah that's actually making trucks more efficient. They just never have to do it. I do. And that's why the legislative branch should be a check on the executive branch, and we've got to do a better job of it. And the court has been almost daring us to do it for a while, and now they just straight up said, do it.
Yeah.
So when the court and the legislative branch are both checking the executive, then we're in balance. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah. So, this is like, I want to highlight that there's a lot of bright spots happening from the deregulation side of government that frustrates a lot of Americans and America.
Yeah.
And so, like with the permit, the FREE Act,
Yes.
that and coupled with that overturning with Chevron, there's a lot of good things going on. And I don't think people are talking about that.
I agree. It's easy to get caught up in whatever the sexy topic is of the day. Whatever cable news is covering, whatever like the popular podcasts are covering tend to be what we end up talking about the most. But I think there are some really exciting things happening that are flying under the radar a little bit that we'll look back and say, politics got a little wild for a while there, but we fixed some really systemic fundamental problems that have helped the American people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate you coming back.
You're welcome. I said I would, so I did.
So you did. And we don't have to go for super long, but I did feel like we left off just as we started getting into some of these specific bills.
Yeah.
That I think you want to discuss.
I do.
And then as we go along, I'll whatever comes up in my brain, I'll pop it up. So we talked about the FREE Act.
Yes.
You've co-sponsored, I got here, or you've sponsored 4 other bills. Maybe talk to me about...
I've introduced like 12.
12, yeah. So yourself, because there's some co-sponsored bills here on this list, and then there's just the 4 sponsored bills. But so you have 12 bills that you sponsored.
Yeah.
I got my glasses on. Should I just leave my glasses on?
Yeah.
No, I'll take them off.
Well, we left off talking about accountability, and that's why I want to talk about these bills, because if I'm introducing bills, but my constituents don't know about it, then that's not very accountable either. Even though you can go to congress.gov and look.
Nobody does that.
But nobody does that. And
maybe a handful of people do it.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times all they're looking at is what is your voting record on the other bills that are being presented.
Actually, I don't think anybody looks at that either, because I do a lot of public events where people ask me about my votes. And a lot of times, they're mad that I voted opposite of how I actually voted. And I don't know that people know how easy that is to check either.
Yeah. So which one comes up? What one sticks in your mind that you've been called out before and it was wrong?
I voted against the Ukraine supplemental aid package. And I get asked about that one all the time. Why did you vote to send all this money to Ukraine? And I didn't. Now, I do think we should support Ukraine. I think it's important that they win in this conflict. But I did vote against the supplemental because I felt like it was too much cash.
Yeah.
And they haven't demonstrated an ability to be really accountable with that. But that's probably the number one. And I get a lot of questions. Like I've had people say that I'm not in Washington, D.C. and voting, and I've missed very few votes, and mostly because of flight delays. But like people don't know to go check. So somebody says it, then everybody else starts saying it, then people believe it. But it's really easy to go see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's people get outraged over interesting things. You miss a couple of votes and everybody misses a couple of votes, right? And
I don't think people realize how often we vote. If we're in Washington, D.C., we're voting. If we're not voting, we're out of session. And so I've probably voted 400 times in the 8 months that I've been in. And so I'll have people say, out of the 10 votes you've taken, I disagree with 4 of them. I'm like, whoa, 4 votes out of 400 is actually a pretty good record. But I don't say that to make fun of people. They don't know. I mean, you get caught up in whatever's being talked about.
Yeah.
And a lot of it just never gets reported. There's no way to ever know.
Yeah. Yeah. The transparency thing is a tough thing to dive into. There's a lot of things on the internet that aren't always accurate.
Yeah.
So talk me through some of these other bills.
Okay. So I've tried to introduce bills that impact people in Utah. I've introduced bills that are response to complaints I've heard. So one of the big examples of that is the Public Land Search and Rescue Act.
Okay.
That came from conversations with sheriffs. In Utah, we have a lot of public land. The majority of our land is public land. And I think most people know that we don't get taxes off of that land, but I don't think a lot of people have thought through, in a county like Garfield County, where they have, I think, 4,000 residents in the area around the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, but they get a couple million visitors every year. So you've got a few thousand people paying taxes, a couple million people coming to visit, and not everybody who comes to visit knows how to recreate in vast swaths of unoccupied federal land.
Yeah.
And so they do a lot of search and rescue out there, and that falls on the sheriff's department. And they have volunteers who help, and they have really good people who want to be part of this, but it costs money to go pull people out of these canyons or go find them when they're lost. And a lot of times the people who are recreating have better equipment than the sheriffs do. So there are a lot of problems that the sheriffs need help with. A lot of it is paying for the time of the people who are doing search and rescue. But I introduced this bill to try to help them get better equipment so that they are as well equipped when they're going out to find people as the people who are getting lost are.
And these little areas, they can't fund that themselves. It's impossible.
No. And it just intuitively makes sense to most people that they shouldn't have to. I mean, it really doesn't, the math doesn't work.
Yeah.
But they also don't want to leave people out there and let them die. I mean, that's not the answer either. So what I introduced is a bill.
Some people don't want that to happen.
I think the sheriffs don't want to leave them out there and let them die. So the bill I introduced is a grant program for areas with a high percentage of public land and a low population to help them get grants for equipment. And the reason I did that is because I was hearing complaints from sheriffs and county commissioners, county elected officials who are saying, we can't keep footing the bill for this. We also can't ignore the responsibility.
Well, I think the Washington County helped provide and help bring money to get Life Flight and things like that a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That's been hugely impactful, especially for Zion National Park. But that's just one of lots of areas people need.
Yeah, we have
support.
canyon country all over southern Utah where, it requires technical skills, and even people who know what they're doing sometimes get in trouble.
Yeah.
But then you have to have the equipment to get in and get people out. You can't just have a volunteer Jeep brigade go get people out of a slot canyon during a flood.
Yeah, or find where they are. Even just finding them when they get lost. The internet says 70% of Utah is public land or owned by the federal government or the state government. 70%.
Yeah. And
if you look across the state, actually Governor Cox posted this on X, formerly known as Twitter, about those public lands and his push to release the federal lands that are not appropriated. It's one of these challenges that we have in Utah that a lot of states do not have. It's not even close.
No, and the states that do have it tend to not have large populations because Most of the land is federal. And so we're always fighting an uphill battle when it comes to these land issues, helping the rest of our colleagues understand what that means, that the majority of the land in Utah is federal.
So that one, that's a grant. Did that pass? Or that's
it's introduced, so we're working.
I'm just a bill. I always think of that Schoolhouse Rock. Always.
Yeah. So if you're a fan of Schoolhouse Rock, you have to introduce it in the House and in the Senate. And after it passes both of those chambers, if it's identical, then it goes to the president to sign it. So it's introduced in the House. We haven't introduced it in the Senate yet. I haven't found a Senate co-sponsor yet, but it is bipartisan in the House. It's co-led by a Democrat from Hawaii because he came to Utah. He looked at the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. He talked to sheriffs and he thought, yeah, this really doesn't make sense. They need help out here.
Yeah.
And that's part of my job as a representative too, is to take Utah's stories and tell them to people from other parts of the country in a way that gets them to help us solve these problems. Because I can't do it by myself.
Right.
Utah can't do it by ourselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, what else?
Well, right before we went on, you mentioned the more DOT grants bill and the more USDA grants bill. Both of those came out of conversations with local elected officials as well. Also bipartisan and bicameral. So they've been introduced in the House and the Senate. And it came out of conversations with Nevada elected officials. We have these counties in these western states that are mostly public land where they have these, infrastructure needs, these structural needs with roads and, sometimes things like a fire station that there are USDA grants for, but these really small counties, really small towns don't have the resources to compete. So the programs are designed for them, but they don't have full-time grant writers. And sometimes because they have this really small tax base, they can't come up with the matching requirements. So usually like with these USDA grants for, the community needs like a fire station, they'd have to come up with 50% of the cost. And some of these really small counties like Paiute County can't come up with 50% of the cost, but they still need to provide the service. So what these bills do is say if you're, again, a small county with a majority of public land, you can get a 25-75 cost share. So it's easier to come up with the matching, but also the agencies that administer these programs have to give more technical assistance. So it just puts a thumb on the scale to try to help them compete against areas that have full-time grant writers that don't need the grants as badly, but compete better for them.
Okay. So the thinking of what these grants would go towards, like the DOT, so the Department of Transportation.
Yeah. So roads.
So just roads.
Yeah.
Is that the only thing that falls under?
Yeah. For the DOT ones, the USDA ones, they have a lot of rural programs, including, water, like the infrastructure that's required to supply water to the residents.
Okay.
Or things like I've already mentioned a fire station a couple of times, sometimes like a community center or something else that serves a need in the community that the local government is required to provide, but they don't always have the upfront ability to provide it.
Yeah.
So they can do these grants or loans and spread that out.
Got it. So those are interesting. So grant programs.
Yep.
The Hydro Act.
Just to be clear, those grant programs already exist. I'm on those ones. I'm not creating any new grant programs. I'm just trying to help the communities that are least able to compete in those existing grant programs.
Okay.
Because sometimes I get pushback on like, why are you creating a grant program? I'm not. Those grant programs exist. They're funded, but the people who need them the most have the hardest time competing.
Yeah. It's like saying you could put accessory dwelling units in our city, but then there's like 52 requirements to like actually be able to put that accessory dwelling unit in on your property, and then nobody ends up doing it. It just sits there.
So the people who need to create a mother-in-law apartment so they can take care of their mother-in-law don't have the ability to go through all of the hoops.
Right.
And it's not solving the problem. But somebody who wants to have a rental and they work with a property management company or whatever, they might be sophisticated enough to get through it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
So then moving forward on what's the Hydro Act?
The Hydro Act, again, is responding to a need. We have been in several years of drought. Things are looking a little better right now than they were a couple of years ago. But we have a lot of hydropower in the West. A lot of our municipal power providers have low cost power coming from the big dams we have. When water's low, the dams aren't producing as much power.
Right.
And it puts our municipal power providers in kind of a double bind. So they're not getting the cheap power from the dams that's, creates a lot of their portfolio, but then they also have to go out and compete on the open market to replace that power when everybody else is competing on the open market. And in a supply and demand curve, supply is down. Demand hasn't changed at all.
It's going up rapidly.
That's true. It is going up. It has changed, but there's nothing about a drought that makes the demand less.
Right.
And so we, people who are paying power bills, are the ones who end up getting caught in that. So what it does is it says that when those hydro dams aren't producing as much power, they can't charge extra for the operation and maintenance of the dams. These are federal dams. They're built with federal money. They're managed by the federal government. And this is Congress saying, in times of drought, you have to be a good player with local governments and drop those operation and maintenance costs and not charge more for the power. And then when we have good times and the water's high, then you can go back.
Okay, so it's almost like it's almost controlling. It's a price control a little bit from the standpoint of.
I don't know that I'd call it price control.
I know
because
that doesn't play well.
The federal government's operating these dams, and it's just the federal government saying this is how we're going to operate them, so that we're not price gouging local power providers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just acknowledging that when we're in drought and the water's low, everyone's hurting, and the federal government's going to take a haircut on that as well.
Okay. So it drives home the point, there's another one here, the Power Act of 2023, Protect Our Wealth of Energy Resources Act. Maybe help me understand. I understand that portion of municipal governments can go bankrupt because of their power bill.
Yeah.
It's in the past, it's happened lots of times where cities bankrupt themselves just because of the utility company, because the cost of power.
And they don't have the option of just not providing power.
Correct.
They can't just suddenly say, we're not in the power business. I mean, there are real consequences to actual people.
I don't think most people understand is like the power, like let's say St. George City, for an example, is that if they're not producing the power themselves, they have to buy that power from someone else.
Yes.
And they buy it from all different kinds of places and different power companies on the open market and different types, right? Not just one renewable source versus coal or whatever. They're going to go to the market and find what's the best price for the power that we need, and they have to continue to pay for it. If they don't have the money, that's where they get into trouble real quick.
We pay for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And whatever market forces are making it tough for them to provide that power are going to make it expensive for them to replace it out on the market.
And this is what I'm not quite sure I understand how the utility market has evolved over the last 100 years. But the fact we're in this position, like thinking of Santa Clara, Ivins, they get their power from Rocky Mountain Power. St. George City has their own power, and they've done a really good job managing that power. They have some local sources of power, but also they've been smart in purchasing power for long terms, like 10 years at a time.
Yeah. So
they're kind of ahead of the curve. But the fact that we have these small municipal power companies managing it seems like it's not a very stable structure, the way that it's all set up.
They actually do a good job. They work together. They've got their associations where these small municipalities all kind of pool together and do their long-term planning and manage their portfolios. I think they're being smart about it. We take for granted that we have reliable power. We never have to think about it. You flip a switch, the lights come on.
But California and Texas, recent history in Texas is going through it right now, where they're on shaky ground for rolling brownouts
in Texas.
In Texas and in
Texas
California
is where we produce a lot of energy.
Yeah,
right?
they there's power companies that sell the natural gas that's extra, and they literally just burn it off into the atmosphere because they don't want to use that. It's so inexpensive, but we're not utilizing it for power. They're actually, somebody's buying the extra natural gas that they get out of some of the fracking that they do, and then they just send it off into the atmosphere. They don't even use it because there's not infrastructure to use that natural gas in other places, because liquefied natural gas it's a complicated thing to transport from one place to another.
Well, we just made a decision at the executive level in this country that we're not exporting LNG.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated. We can produce a lot of energy in this country, but we're making some dumb choices about what kind of energy we're willing to use. And that hurts taxpayers. It hurts bill payers, rate payers. And so some of what I'm trying to do with those bills is to make decisions at the policy level that make sense to protect people who are paying power bills.
Yeah.
Because I'm all for, the states experimenting and, private companies making private decisions. And we can live and learn, and some people are going to stay in business and some people are going to go out of business because of their decisions. But when it comes to providing power, we actually are dependent on that to survive anymore.
Yeah.
You can't just turn off people's power.
Yeah. Food, water, shelter, and power. Those are, and the story of the last 150 years has been power.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's the story of the world. It's been fought, wars have been fought over this in the name of other things, but it's mainly been about power stability, right?
Well,
Your ability
and we
to
talk about all of the above energy portfolios, and that is the way to go. But the truth is, and you brought it up earlier, we're using more and more energy every year.
Yeah.
So we can't just make decisions that deliver the same amount of energy we've had. We've got to make decisions that are delivering more power. Policy-wise, we're having these discussions at the national level, not so much in Utah. I think everyone in Utah, well, the majority of people in Utah understand that we need more power. Nationally, we're having these discussions about, phasing out coal, phasing out fossil fuels, phasing out. We can't phase anything out. We have to be adding more energy to the grid.
Do you think that's just a tagline? Do you think this is like they're going to say this thing, but in reality, that's not really what they want? They're trying to placate the climate change kind of concerns, because the jury's out for me. Is there a change in the climate? Yes, but that's, to me, you're talking about all of there's so many different factors that are going into play on this, and we're trying to control one little slice of it, and then we're basically the only country that's really taken focus on this. If you look at there's a chart where it talks about CO2 emissions over the last decade in the United States has really carried a lot of that weight. And then other countries.
Europe, but now they're having problems.
They're having to go backwards.
Yeah. And so I think it depends on who they is. When you say, do they really believe this? I think it depends on who we're talking about. There are people out there who really think we can make energy from, fairy dust and well-meaning thoughts. And then there are people who just refuse to accept reality. And there are a lot of people who just don't know, and they're being caught up in a PR campaign. And I think Europe's a really good example right now of what happens if you don't have your eyes wide open when it comes to power.
Yeah.
They've made a lot
Germany,
of these decisions, and now they're hurting for power, and they're getting more and more dependent on Russian natural gas, which is not a good thing right now with the state of the world. And they used to produce a lot of geothermal. Geothermal's renewable. It's clean energy, but they moved away from that. And now they're dependent on a nation that doesn't have their best interest at heart.
And they have zero concern about the climate change, because they're like, well, it's cold up here all the time. So if it gets warmer, that'd be better for us. I don't know.
But if it comes to a choice between climate change and growing Russian power, they're going to choose growing Russian power. They're not going to hobble themselves over climate change. While the rest of the developed world is kind of wringing its hands and limiting its own growth because of an ideology that isn't necessarily.
There's so many resources in Utah. Before, and we could get back to some other bills, but what do you think is what is possible for us to do in being self-sustaining from a energy standpoint in Utah?
Oh, we have resources in Utah. It keeps coming back to the same problem. The majority of our land is managed by the federal government, and we're having decisions made by the executive branch, by the president, that we're not going to explore for oil and gas on public land. We're not going to export liquefied natural gas. We're tying our hands in some ways. And it's hard. I mean, we have good geothermal resources in Utah, but they're mostly on public land. And so there's all this permitting process you have to go through to develop them. And so the economics of producing energy aren't really working as if we're a free market, because we're not a free market. We're producing a lot of our energy in Utah from public lands. And so it's not free market. We have all of these bureaucratic permitting decisions that happen by the federal government that interfere in supply and demand.
So do you think that's the first step? The first step is that we have to take back control of lands that are not appropriated, that are not national monuments or not designated as some kind of area. We have to be able to take that back and then allow the free market to explore these areas. And then, with sustainability and environmental, what the impact is going to be on those, let us make those decisions, not let the...
Yeah, I think that
DC
is an important step. I don't know that it's the first step because it's going to take time. And we have steps we could take that wouldn't take any time at all.
Okay.
So I guess the first step is we need a different president. When Donald Trump was in the White House, we were energy independent.
Mm-hmm.
Biden goes into the White House. Now we're not energy independent. Our energy independence shouldn't swing like that based on who's in the White House.
Yeah,
so we need to fix our permitting process, but we also need, as I keep saying, to restore that balance of power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, because right now we have these wild policy swings based on who's in the White House. Mm-hmm. And I'm obviously biased. I support Trump. I do not support President Biden. But no matter who's in the White House, we shouldn't have wild swings in policy. We should have thoughtful policy that's been debated on the public stage. And that's what the legislative branch is a lot better at than the executive branch. So I think that's the first step. We need to be producing our own energy when and where we can. We're not doing that right now. And then, yesterday, the state filed a lawsuit to get title to lands that aren't appropriated. That would also be really helpful. And while that's working its way through the courts, we need to have permitting that makes sense for even the areas where we are producing energy. If you are an energy production company, the idea of getting a permit on federal land versus somewhere in the Midwest on private land, they don't even compare. You can do one of these much more quickly and less expensively than the other.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't really be, we shouldn't be tying our own hands and refusing to produce our own energy and then importing energy from other parts of the world where they don't do it as well. It's not as clean. They don't have the same protections for workers, for example, and they hate us and, could turn off our energy.
Yeah.
We won World War II in large part because of our big hydro dams producing cheap energy that allowed us to produce tanks and airplanes and bullets.
But we couldn't build the Hoover Dam again today.
No.
We couldn't do it.
We wouldn't even be able to get through the conversation about it.
Right. I mean, yeah. Let's talk.
We're off on a tangent.
A couple more sponsored bills.
Okay.
A couple more sponsored bills. What else do you got? There's a True Cost Act I see here.
Yeah. So the True Cost Act says that anytime we do something in Congress, we have to tell the American people what that actually will cost the average American family. So even
it's so hard to do, though.
It is hard to do, but we've got to go through the process of trying to do it. That keeps us accountable. It keeps us transparent. But it also, when you're talking about a federal budget, you're talking about such big numbers that it's easy to kind of lose track of how big those numbers really are.
Oh yeah.
And when you can say this thing that we're doing would cost every American family 30 cents, that gives you some perspective. Or this would cost every American family $5,000 a year. That gives you some perspective as well.
Yeah.
Those are numbers that people can really understand. Once you start talking billions and trillions, the difference between 1 billion or 1 trillion and 2 trillion is huge, but it doesn't sound like it when you're saying it.
Yeah, you're like, it's only going up one number.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. The visual graphic of what in $100 bills, what a $1 trillion is, and it's like this, it's like a 2-minute panning of football field after football field of money that it's almost impossible to really comprehend how much money we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so I guess that makes sense. That does make sense. So that one was introduced, looks like around the same time as the MORE Acts. So
in January.
Has that gone to the Senate?
No, not yet.
Okay. So
this happens a lot when you have a Democrat Senate and a Republican House.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you get the focuses are so different on what they're doing that it's hard to get a bill introduced.
Yeah.
Which is, we've talked a lot about the FREE Act and the permitting thing. One of the things that's so exciting about that is that there is a Senate sponsor. Cynthia
Nice.
Lummis from Wyoming is a Senate sponsor on that. And that just helps things
Move.
Yeah.
Okay. So what else we got? What else should we talk about as far as the different bills?
Well, now you're making me try to remember everything I've introduced off the top of my head.
There's some codes. The Drone Research and Innovation for Law Enforcement Act of 2023. This one was.
Yeah, that one's not mine. I'm a co-sponsor.
That was a
on
co-sponsor. Yeah.
And I have a lot of those. If you're going to look at co-sponsored, I have dozens of co-sponsored bills.
Yeah.
And that happens for various reasons. Sometimes it's because somebody introduced a bill on something you were already working on, so you jump on their bill. Sometimes it's, somebody had a good idea that you wish you'd have thought of, so you jump on their bill. And sometimes it's just, hey, this is a Republican and they're trying to do good Republican things, and I want to support that.
Yeah. Okay. I have a couple different directions I want to go.
All right.
But what do you
I'm feeling
wanna
like
go?
a good sport this morning. Let's
feeling like a good
see
sport?
where you want to go.
What happened with the FISA vote?
Yeah. Okay.
Help me understand it.
Yeah, I've explained this one so many times I can almost do it in my sleep. So FISA is something that I've actually been paying attention to for years. It's kind of a hot new topic for a lot of people, but I worked for Chris Stewart, and he was one of the people who was sounding the alarm on this back when nobody was alarmed. Fun fact that I like to bring up at town halls because it always surprises people. We renewed FISA during the Trump administration. Trump signed a FISA renewal with no amendments. It's just not something that Republicans were super concerned about a few years ago, and they should have been. That's when a lot of the big abuse was happening. So FISA is not like an enabling act for the intel community. It limits what they can do.
Let me ask a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you believe FISA violates the Constitution?
I think they were using it to violate the Constitution a few years ago. I think we fixed it. So this is the fundamental misunderstanding about FISA. I mean, I've heard over and over and over in the last few months, warrantless wiretaps, clearly unconstitutional. If we voted for those, Supreme Court would strike it down anyway. Because if you're going to wiretap an American citizen, you have to have a warrant. We can't legislatively say you don't.
But the court would only strike it down if it was brought to them.
Yeah, and it would be.
Okay.
Okay, so here's the thing with FISA that's so upsetting. FISA regulates how the intel agencies can surveil foreigners outside the United States. That's what it's supposed to deal with. In doing the mass surveillance of internet traffic of foreigners outside the United States, the agencies have been getting incidental information about Americans, and that sits in a database. Well, if you get incidental information enough times, it starts to be a pretty good amount of information that's sitting in this 702 database. So everyone talks about 702. That comes from Section 702 of FISA. And what was happening is that, like the FBI, for example, if they thought you might be breaking the law, maybe they thought you were distributing drugs in St. George, they'd take your name and run it through that database and see if anything came up. And there's some logic to it. I mean, they're surveilling drug cartels outside the United States. So they might have some information that the drug cartels are exchanging about a guy in St. George. But the problem is they don't have the authority to do it. It's unconstitutional. So you reside in the United States. I assume you're a U.S. citizen. That means you have Fourth Amendment rights. So whatever they're doing to surveil foreigners outside the United States doesn't apply to you because you're protected by the Fourth Amendment. And they were querying that database to see what information they could find to supplement their investigations. That is unconstitutional. And they were doing it. So there were a few guys, like my former boss, who were sounding the alarm on that and saying, we've got to amend FISA to stop this because it's unconstitutional. It shouldn't happen. So it ended up, they had two committees that have jurisdiction over this. So the Intel Committee, which Chris Stewart was on, and the Judiciary Committee, which is chaired by Jim Jordan, both had jurisdiction over it. And they started working together to amend FISA to make sure this wouldn't happen anymore. And, a lot of this was precipitated on our side of the aisle. The reason people started really paying attention is because of Crossfire Hurricane and Carter Page and, the things that the intel community did to Trump to try to stop Trump. So now all of a sudden everybody's supercharged on this, but the problem existed before that. And there were people trying to fix the problem before that. But now all of a sudden there's a microscope on it. So what happened is those two committees sat down and they came up with 56 amendments to FISA to help fix that. Mm-hmm. But then there were 6 things they disagreed on, 3 on one side, 3 on the other. And in some ways, it's unfortunate that they agreed to the 56 amendments too quickly, because then everybody ignored that and focused on the handful of things they disagreed on. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the hype you've heard about it has to do with those 6 things. The Judiciary Committee wanted a warrant requirement to look in that database. Mm-hmm. I supported that. I voted for that. In the House, it was a tied vote. Mm-hmm. Tied vote doesn't get in as an amendment. In the Senate, it only got 17 votes. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't going to make it through the Senate, even if we'd have had one vote move in the House. But as we just talked about, you already have to have a warrant to search or surveil a U.S. citizen. So it would have been like belt and suspenders. In those 56 amendments.
So hold on, let me back up. So the FBI would have already had to, let's say they're investigating me, and I'm communicating to somebody outside the country.
Yeah.
And they already have a warrant to investigate me. So they don't necessarily, you're saying they don't need another warrant to access the database if they were already investigating me. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but I was saying it the other way. I'm saying they already can't investigate you until they have a warrant. And we were saying you have to have a warrant to look in this database. Mm-hmm. So it was saying the same thing again. But
I'm still confused. I'm sorry.
Well, it's confusing. This is why there was so much debate about it in Congress. The people on one side are saying you already have to have a warrant, and the people on the other side were saying, then why not say you have to have a warrant? But what nobody was talking about is in those amendments, or in the changes that they'd already agreed to, 90% of the people who had access to that database lost access to the database. Only 10% of them still have it. Mm-hmm. And for those 10%, they can't tie a search of that database to an investigation of a crime. It has to be tied to surveillance of a foreigner outside the United States. And there's a 100% outside audit on all of those searches to ensure that. And those audits get reviewed by the Judiciary Committee. And anybody who violates that faces 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. That's a huge change. Mm-hmm. So before, someone could go in and casually query that database, and they didn't have to explain why they were querying it. Now they have to say why, and it has to be tied to surveillance of a foreigner outside the United States. And that's a big protection for you, because they can't say, I'm looking for evidence that he's distributing drugs. They have to say, this is tied to surveillance of a foreigner outside the United States, and you're not a foreigner and you're not outside the United States, so they can't query you. So with those 56 changes, we've fixed the problem that everyone was upset about, but we didn't talk about those 56 changes. We talked about the warrant requirement. That's all anyone talked about. Mm-hmm. And what I like to remind people is, the Carter Page scenario, which is the poster child for why we needed these changes, they got a warrant. It wasn't that they didn't think they needed a warrant. They knew they needed a warrant, but they doctored emails and lied to the court to get a warrant. And so to me, what was so broken is that these people who have this authority to look in the database felt like they were bulletproof. They felt like they were untouchable. They dared lie to a court and were confident that there would be no repercussions for them. We fixed that.
Got it.
And then the FISC, the courts, the FISA courts, they didn't have any transcripts because they were dealing with sensitive information. Right. Every other federal court has a transcript. Every other federal investigation, they have transcripts of their interrogations. So now they have to keep transcripts of all that. If there's classified information in there, then, the public can't see it, but it still exists.
Just redacted and
someone who has the clearance can go see it. And that keeps people honest. Mm-hmm. So there are really fundamental good changes in it. That's why I voted to reauthorize FISA, because being able to surveil foreigners outside the United States is an important tool.
I mean, that goes all the way back to the Revolutionary War, right? People writing letters, or you go back into the 60s and like phone calls to foreign countries and foreign governments. And, so the ability to survey or surveil what's happening outside of the borders is a difficult thing, especially once the internet's there. So I can understand that there needs to be some oversight. So this focuses on FBI. Who has access to that 702 database outside of the FBI?
The CIA, the foreign intelligence agencies do. But
NSA.
Now only a certain number of people at those agencies have it, and they have complete oversight, 2 layers of outside oversight.
Okay. And those two layers, one more time, come back.
So of all the queries of the database, there's 100% audit by an outside entity. I mean, that's written in law now.
And that entity is who?
I don't know. It says in the law it has to be 100% surveillance by an outside entity. I'm sure it's something that'll get contracted.
Got it.
And then all of those audits get reviewed by the Judiciary Committee. So Congress is one of the layers of oversight.
Okay, got it. Okay, and then specifically, why was the FBI stated specifically in this? Because they're dealing namely with American citizens, where the NSA and the CIA, they also do that for American citizens as well, right?
Their primary responsibility is overseas.
Overseas, okay.
The FBI is investigating things that happen in the United States. And so for them to have been looking in that database, like they probably never should have been able to anyway. So it gets kind of weird because after 9/11, Congress said, how come the FBI and the CIA aren't talking to each other? And that's what they were exercising oversight on. And then we had the Patriot Act, obviously lots of problems with the Patriot Act, and we've been pulling things back ever since.
Right.
But now we're saying, okay, you guys should be talking to each other when it comes to if the FBI has information that a foreigner outside of the United States is planning an attack, you better be sharing that with the CIA. But what you can't do is talk to each other to get around constitutional protections for U.S. citizens.
Yeah, got it. And then those two oversights are the ones that come into place there. So it's your position that it's not violating the Constitution because access to the 702 database that has information about Americans as a secondary consequence of surveilling non-American, outside. What about foreigners inside the United States?
You can't surveil them.
Okay.
Once you're inside the United States, you also have protections. And this frustrates people too. So
even non-citizens.
Even non-citizens. So I've had a lot of conversations with people who are really upset about FISA and they want FISA to go away. And then in the same, town hall, someone will say, how come we're not tracking these people who are crossing our border illegally? For the same reason, because they only have the authority to surveil foreigners outside the United States. Once you're in the United States, you have certain level of protection. Now, whether we need to revisit that for people who come into the United States illegally
seems like it's a good idea.
So it's all part of the same debate, the same conversation, and it gets complicated really quickly.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to say, I don't want the government spying on me. Well, I don't want the government spying on me either. Although
you're specifically stated that they can't spy on you.
Yeah, true. Although I have had to voluntarily give them all kinds of information about myself. But then, who can they spy on? That's when things get complicated in a big hurry.
Okay, that makes sense to me. I think that helps me understand that a little bit better.
Good. I'm glad you asked then, because it's something that takes some time to explain, but it doesn't take any time at all to misunderstand.
Yeah, I think so too. What are some of the other ones that you've taken some flack for? You won Washington County in the special election.
Yeah.
And then you didn't win Washington County on this regular election.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's only been a week since they've called the election, so I haven't had a whole lot of time to postmortem that. But quickly, it's messaging matters. And a lot of the messaging in this regular cycle was really negative and not necessarily informative. So things like FISA. There was a lot of talk about FISA. Not much of the talk about FISA was about what FISA actually does or the ways we actually amended it. And the other one that I took a lot of flack about was the spending bills. I voted in favor of the 2 spending bills that we passed in the last 6 months. And I could explain it in my sleep at this point. Yeah. But I made what I felt like was the most fiscally responsible choice I had. I didn't love it. I would have much rather had spending bills that cut a lot more.
But the bottom line is you're having to operate within the system that we have, and the Democrats run the Senate and the Republicans have a very, very, very slim majority. They're only like a one.
We're at 3 now.
We're at 3, okay.
Because of 2 special elections.
The 2 special elections. So in that environment, there's only so many things that you can change on a given cycle, right? Sure. And if we don't push a new budget through, it defaults to the old budget, and the old budget wasn't better.
The old budget was a problem.
And
shutdowns always cost us more money. A lot of people are like, just shut it down. Just shut the government down. We don't need all the government we're getting. And they're not wrong. We don't need all the government we're getting. But history has shown every time we shut the government down, we spend more money. We pay all the back bills, so we didn't save any money on that. and we pass an omni to get out of a shutdown. And we're negotiating from a position of weakness. And this time we really would have been negotiating from a position of weakness because Democrats have the White House and the Senate, and we have such a small majority. And so we get all these bad headlines and people get mad, and then we spend more money. By passing a spending bill, we actually did implement modest cuts. And that was the only option that had any cuts in it. And the truth is we were never going to fix it in 1 year. We're not even going to fix it in one presidential administration. We've got to keep taking steps every year of, cutting every year, tightening the belt every year, streamlining, taking out a lot of the unnecessary bureaucracy and permitting. That's the stuff that I spent a lot of my time on.
I'm worried that the idea of cutting the budget is getting less popular. Like more people are not concerned about lowering the federal spending.
You think they're less concerned? I think they're still concerned. I think a lot of people are frustrated and think it'll never happen, but I think people are just as concerned.
I guess
maybe you could be right.
The amount of people that are specifically impacted by federal spending and state spending, it's everybody. It's growing. It's 40%. Yeah, it's 40% of the country is directly or within one standard deviation, like one step away from they're benefiting off of the spending that the federal government or the state government is doing, and at 40% of the entire economy being focused on that. Any shrinking of that is going to have, the butterfly effect is going to be massive. So
it's true.
And
everything's in the budget because somebody fought to get it there. There's nothing that's just sitting there in the budget and nobody realizes it's there. Somebody's fighting to keep everything in there.
Yeah. Last question.
Okay.
So tell me your stance on Trump historically and then where we're at now.
Yeah.
Because I think some people were like, well, she didn't even vote in any of these other elections, or she doesn't want to, endorse him. He endorsed you. I think you were one of the only congressional members that won that he endorsed.
I'm the only Utah race.
The only in Utah
where he endorsed that his candidate won. And thank you for giving me a chance to answer this, because people confidently tell me how I feel about Trump all the time, which I find baffling.
I've heard that, and I've never. Granted, I haven't listened to every single thing you've ever said, but I was like, I don't know if I could even make that determination without asking.
So. Look, in 2016, he wasn't the guy I wanted to get the nomination.
He wasn't the guy I wanted either.
And that's, I think a lot of us were in that boat. And some of the things I was worried about with Trump, he became the president and I watched him and those things didn't happen. He implemented good policy. And I went to work for Chris Stewart during the Trump administration, and I got to work with people in his administration. I keep pointing out to people, 2 of his cabinet level people also endorsed me. And they were doing a great job. And they were listening to Utah and responding to the things that Utah was saying. And I was really impressed by that. In fact, before I went to work for Chris Stewart, I was working for the Utah Association of Counties. And the Trump administration invited county elected officials and the state legislature to come to the White House complex and sit down and talk to their administration. And they came in with a list of all the government relations contacts for all of the different branches and said, here's how to get a hold of us. Let us know what you need from us. I'm unaware of any other administration doing anything like that. I mean, it was just so impressive the way they responded to local government. And if you've listened to me at all, that's the thing I talk about the most. The federal government needs to be responsive to local government and not just stomp all over everybody all the time. And so I came around on Trump like a lot of people did, and I support him. I support him now. He endorsed me. I endorsed him. I am still confident that he's going to win the White House in the fall. And I'm really looking forward to working with the Trump administration again.
Yeah.
So I've had a lot of people say, well, I remember you not being very excited about him in 2016. It's true. I wasn't.
Yeah.
And then he won. And I was like, well, he's our guy. And he did a great job.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to having that same kind of relationship between local governments and the White House that we had then again.
Yeah, because it's from what I've heard, and this isn't from you, but from what I've heard, it's almost like if you're from Utah, the White House is closed. Like the administration, the current White House,
they don't care what we think.
And I can't help but think, is that because they didn't win that state? Like, is there some fundamental party power play that's going on where it's like, well, you didn't vote for me, so you don't get an ear. You're not a part of the.
I also think they're just not responsive. like this administration does not respond to state and local governments. I think even blue states probably feel like the White House is not as responsive as they would like them to be. I think it's just a difference in political philosophy. I think they feel like they have the answers.
And
They know
leadership
what to
too.
do.
I mean, it's a difference in leadership from a guy who spent his entire career in politics and in government versus a businessman who's looking at it as like, this is a reorganization. How would we run our operation as a business? We're going to run it like that.
And a guy who's also skeptical of government. So he
Right.
gets, like a state like Utah that's skeptical of government. He's like, I get it. Come in here. We'll tell you everything we're doing. We'll give you contacts for all the people so
Yep.
you don't have to feel skeptical. On the other hand, I think you've got a guy who's like, the government is the answer to everything. Obviously, we're the answer to everything. We don't need to explain to you why we're the answer to everything. We just need to keep doing what we think is best.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting election. November's coming up fast.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Thanks for coming back.
You're welcome.
I think this was super helpful for people that are listening.
Good.
And I look forward to the next time you come on.
I will come back. My philosophy as someone who's always been skeptical of government is that the more I can pull the curtain back and let people see what's happening, the more faith they can have that I'm actually representing them and not just off doing what I think is best. So I'm happy to keep coming on. I try to be on the radio as often as I can. I put out a newsletter every week.
I get it. I get it all the time.
so
I don't always read it, but I do
that's
get
fine.
it.
I'm putting it out.
I
So
get
for
it.
anyone who's listening and doesn't get it, you can go to my website, my congressional website, like Congresswoman Celeste Maloy. And as soon as you go on the website, it'll pop up and invite you to sign up for the newsletter. So if you do that, you'll get an email every week of what we're doing. And I even try to make videos that explain like how Congress works. Because I know people do feel like they're locked out. They feel like they don't have access. And my goal is to make people feel like they have access, that the government actually does represent them and listen to them and feel accountable to them. So thank you for giving me an opportunity to do that.
Of course. All right. Thanks for coming on. I hope you enjoyed this episode, everybody. See you out there.
Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.